Hello, I'm Catherine, Brian's behind the camera, and welcome to our first holiday special. The holiday season here in Canada is fast approaching, so we thought we would share some inspiration for vegan holiday meal ideas. We're making a scrumptious, freezer-friendly puff pastry appetizer, a stunning main dish, and a make-ahead friendly pumpkin dessert. So grab your drink of choice and let's start cooking. I'm starting with dessert, because why not? But mostly because this is a make-ahead friendly dessert, which is the best kind of dessert when you're entertaining. Personal-sized pumpkin pie parfaits. And these look really beautiful and planned, but they were born out of my inability to make a pie. And all the components tasted great, but it just was not cooperating in the oven. And as I sat crying over another failed pie, Brian said, how about a parfait? So here we go. We're going to make a crust, a walnut pecan granola, and a pie crust cookie, a pumpkin mousse, and a coconut whip. For the crust, pulse half a cup walnuts, a third a cup pecans, and 1.5 cup oats into a coarse granola. You can chop your nuts by hand if you don't have a food processor. Stir in some sea salt, 1 teaspoon cinnamon, 1/4 cup maple syrup, and 2 tablespoons melted vegan butter. To make the pie-shaped cookies, I remove half a cup of this mixture and quickly blend it into a finer meal in my food processor, and then shape the cookie dough into 6 pie crust cookies. Lay the cookies and granola on a parchment-lined baking sheet. Keep the granola tightly packed to encourage it to clump together, and bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 minutes. After 12 minutes, the cookies are done, so I set these aside, and you'll notice that the granola, the edges have started to brown, but the center might not be as crispy. So just break that up with a spoon and pop it back in the oven for 5 to 8 minutes. When your granola is done, allow it to cool completely on the baking sheet without stirring it. This will also encourage it to cool in some larger clumps. While the crust was in the oven, I made the pumpkin mousse. 1 cup coconut cream, 3/4 cup pumpkin puree, 1/8 cup plus half a tablespoon maple syrup, a pinch of salt, and 1 teaspoon pumpkin pie spice. Or use half a teaspoon cinnamon, 1/8 teaspoon ginger, 1/8 teaspoon nutmeg, a pinch of cloves, and a pinch of allspice. If you haven't seen our video for our caramelized plantain, make sure to watch that one next, because I walk you through how to make this 5-minute coconut whipped cream. It's so easy. If you're wondering what coconut cream is, you take a can of full-fat coconut milk, put it in the fridge for 24 hours, and the cream separates from the coconut water and rises to the top and hardens. Careful not to shake the can, and when you're ready to make your recipe, just scoop out that hardened cream, and that's what you use for the mousse and for the whip. You can actually buy a can of coconut cream, and those have a higher concentration of the cream and less water. Just make sure to read your can. If it's coconut whipping cream, sometimes you use the water as well. I made that mistake last night, and there's some curdly looking coconut whip stuff in the fridge, so read your cans. To build the parfaits, I use 6 4-ounce jars. Sprinkle some granola in the bottom, spoon in pumpkin mousse, another layer of granola, top with coconut whip, sprinkle with cinnamon, and serve with a cookie. To make these ahead, you can keep all the components separate, and the mousse and the whip will continue to firm up in the fridge. Or you can compile the parfaits and just leave the cookies separate so that you can put the lids on and refrigerate these. If you keep them in the fridge for longer than a day, the granola will start to lose its crunch, but it's still really tasty, and you get the crunch from the cookie. Feel free to make larger parfaits if you'd like. I find that these portion sizes are actually really great because the coconut cream is quite rich, and the walnut pecan granola is also really filling. I don't know how to end this section.
Take a bite.
But shouldn't they stay nice? What's better than a make-ahead friendly dessert? A make-ahead appetizer. This one is mostly make-ahead. You can do all the prep ahead of time, and then 25 to 35 minutes in the oven before serving means a delightfully warm, satisfying starter. And because our main dish is a beautiful veggie tray bake, I find myself wanting something a little heavier, a little bready, and dinner rolls or biscuits would do the trick, but so does puff pastry. This one looks a little sad. This was from yesterday. We'll make some fresh ones. Let's make a tofu ricotta. 350 grams extra firm tofu, 3 tablespoons lemon juice, 3 tablespoons nutritional yeast for the cheesy flavor, half a teaspoon salt. Feel free to use less, but it does help achieve that ricotta flavor. 1/8 teaspoon black pepper and half a teaspoon garlic powder. Feel free to use fresh garlic or herbs for extra flavor. I'm only going to use half of this ricotta for this recipe, but I always make a full batch so that I can put the rest in a pasta or another meal throughout the week. Saute 2 cloves of garlic, half a medium onion, 110 grams or 1 1/4 cup mushrooms, and 1 block of frozen cooked spinach, or about 2 cups fresh. This takes only 10 minutes, and then combine it with your 1 cup tofu ricotta. Now for the pastry. This is 1 box of tender flake puff pastry. And if you're looking for a plant-based pastry, just double check the ingredients on the box, but this is a popular brand here in Canada and really easy to find. And it comes with 2 squares of pastry. So whatever you're buying, just make sure you have enough for both the tops and the bottoms of the puff pockets. Separate the 2 squares of pastry and roll them out on a floured surface. Slice each into 6 equal squares. Spoon the filling onto 1 set of 6. Working one at a time, dampen the edges of the bottom pastry by dipping your fingers in a bit of warm water. Cover with the remaining pastry and crimp the edges with a fork. If you have to bake these right away, you can, but if you can put them in the freezer for 30 minutes, it will give the butter in the pastry a chance to firm up again. And to freeze them for longer, after the 30 minutes, just transfer them to a freezer-safe bag or container with pieces of parchment paper or wax paper in between the pastries so they don't stick together. When you're ready to bake your puff pastry pockets, preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Lay your pastries on a prepared baking sheet. Make 3 parallel slits in the tops. Make sure to cut all the way through that top layer of pastry so steam can escape as they bake. Brush with a mixture of 1 tablespoon melted butter and 1 tablespoon maple syrup. Sprinkle with sesame seeds and bake for 20 to 35 minutes until golden brown. I find that the cooking time can vary depending on the kind of pastry you've used, and I also find that if the pastries have only been in the freezer for 30 minutes, they tend to be ready in about 25 minutes in the oven, but if they have been frozen for longer, they can take 35 minutes or so to get brown enough on top. So we're gonna have some coffee and wait for them to be ready. I had to eat one of these warm so that you could hear that flakiness. I'm sorry I did that to you, but now you just have to make them for yourself. And basting these, I feel like I have flaky stuff all over my face. Basting these with the sweet butter is what gives them something extra and makes them feel really festive. And the maple butter ties in perfectly with our main dish. A miso maple butter glazed Hasselback. This is such a mouthful. A miso maple butter glazed Hasselback butternut squash and roasted vegetable tray bake with spiced lentils, sauteed beet greens, and of course, cranberry sauce. The lentils can be made ahead of time. Simmer 1½ cups dried green lentils in 6 cups water with 1 bay leaf and 1 star anise pod for 15 to 20 minutes. Drain and serve, or cool and reheat when you're ready. The cranberry sauce, so easy. Who knew? You might have known, but it's ready in 15 minutes. And for this tray bake, I blend it into a cranberry drizzle, but feel free to dollop it on like a traditional chunky cranberry sauce. Boil ½ a cup of water and 1/4 cup cane sugar or maple syrup. Add 2 cups fresh or frozen cranberries. Simmer for 10 minutes. Add some orange zest or cinnamon if you'd like, and that's it. The sauteed beet greens can also be made ahead because they're quite sturdy. So saute them quickly in a pan with some salt, some garlic, some lemon juice, and then reheat them in a pan when you're ready to serve. You could also serve this with a raw leafy green for a quicker option, or in our case today, some red Swiss chard, because every grocery store I visited was out of beets with the greens on. It looks like exactly the same. And now for the star of the meal, the tray bake. Brian and I have eaten a lot of butternut squash lately developing this recipe, so I'm only going to use half of the squash today. And this way, all of my vegetables will fit on 1 tray. But if you're using the full squash, then feel free to have 1 tray for the squash and the beets and another tray for the rest of your vegetables. Wash and peel your squash. You can keep the stem on for looks. Slice in half and scoop out the seeds. Separate the seeds from the membrane. I toss the membrane in my frozen veggie scraps bag for homemade broth. Wash the seeds, let them dry, and reserve the seeds and peel for a crispy garnish. To Hasselback the squash, first, make sure you did actually clean the inside of the squash, because when we took the photos for this recipe, I was moving a little quickly and forgot to clean out half the squash. Pretty harmless, but not the most polished way to serve this. And Hasselback refers to a way of slicing potatoes, or in this case, a squash, into thin slices that are not cut all the way through. And we have the Swedish to thank for this inventive way of making sure flavor gets into all the crevices, and it looks pretty too. Use wooden spoons or chopsticks as a guide to prevent your knife from slicing all the way to the bottom of the squash, and make thin, even layers. Many recipes call for slicing your squash after it's been in the oven for 15 to 30 minutes and it's softer, but I find it easier to slice it before it's been in the oven so that it's not piping hot and difficult to handle. Lay your Hasselback squash on a prepared baking sheet and baste with 2 tablespoons melted butter, 2 teaspoons miso paste for saltiness, and just under a 1/4 cup maple syrup for sweetness. Scatter raw, peeled, and diced beets that have been drizzled with olive oil and sprinkled with salt, pepper, and dried thyme around the squash, and roast at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. Meanwhile, wash 1/2 pound of Brussels sprouts, slice off these hard ends, and then slice them in half, and prep 3 or 4 parsnips or carrots. And keep in mind that parsnips will start to oxidize and change color once you peel them, so don't prep them too early, or put them in a bowl of water with some lemon juice. And then toss these in some oil, a bit of salt, pepper, thyme, just like you did with the beets, and we're going to add them to the tray bake in just a few minutes. After 30 minutes, remove the squash and beets from the oven. Turn the beets, baste the squash with more miso maple butter, and add the Brussels sprouts and parsnips to the tray. Bake for another 20 to 30 minutes. Baste the squash one more time at the 15-minute mark, and slide your squash, peel, and seeds in the oven too. When your tray bake is done, your squash seeds and peel will be browned and the seeds will have started to pop. But if you make those ahead of time, then a bonus is to leave them in the oven once you turn the oven off, and they'll get extra crispy as they cool. And I just toss them in some oil and a bit of salt because I like keeping the rest of the veggies in this tray bake really simple and keeping the miso maple flavor for the squash only. That way the sweetness isn't overwhelming, the squash is the star, and the cranberry sauce balances out the sweetness. I think it's time to serve up our holiday meal. What do you think? Intimidating? Not too intimidating? A good mix of make-ahead options? Let us know in the comments below how you're feeling, what you think, and if you're wondering what this holiday feast cost us. Well, this serves 6 and costs us just over $35. The Hasselback tray bake is about $17 for all the vegetables, $1.50 for the cranberry sauce, and 75 cents for the lentils. The puff pastry appetizer costs us $7.28. Hold on a second. That version of me had a long day and forgot to account for both sheets of puff pastry. So add about $2 to the appetizer cost, and we're good. $1.89 for the half batch of tofu ricotta, $5.39 for all the rest. And these adorable deconstructed pumpkin pie personal parfaits are $8.68, I think. $1.45 a serving. Does that make sense? 1 second. I'm right. So I hope your mouth is watering. Click those links below for these recipes and let us know if you try them out this holiday season. Subscribe for a new video every Sunday at 5. And if you're already thinking what you would do with the leftovers from this tray bake, tune in next Sunday. We have some eating to do, Brian.